Welcome to another postcard from Greece. In today's program, we're going to be discussing an issue that has garnered a great amount of attention here in Greece, but has remained practically unknown outside of Greece, both in the ecclesiastical press and in the secular press. It's an issue that raises a lot of eyebrows and stirs emotions, and has earned the condemnation of many ecclesiastical men and institutions here in Greece. It's an issue that has 14 bishops against it, publicly stating their opposition, and an issue that has the holy community of Mount Athos officially condemning this new development in Greece. 24 elders, spiritual children of Elder Paisios on Mount Athos, have come out with a text urging the faithful away from this new development, and by all means to not be a part of it. And the Holy Synod of Greece has issued 2 press releases and has met on a number of occasions urging reservation and a great deal of skepticism from the faithful toward this particular development. Professors of theology and well-known ecclesiastical men and writers have come out against this new development, warning the faithful away from it. What is this that has garnered so much attention here in Greece? And what does it mean for us abroad, if anything? This will be the content of our program today, and perhaps in future programs as well. Well, the new development is called, in Greek, η κάρτα του πολίτη, or in translation, the citizen's card. It's a new technology and use of technology on the part of the government for the interaction of the citizen with the government. It's a new kind of identification, but not only. It will serve not only as an identification card instead of the identification card to date, but it also serves as a way of interacting in any way with the government, but also in the buying and selling of everything in the Greek society. And I think this particular last point and other aspects of this card, the possibilities, the technological possibilities behind this card and what is available to those in power, is what raises a lot of eyebrows and a lot of opposition from Christians, but not only. There are a lot of people in the Greek society, people who are not officially speaking on part of the church, or not even Christians, and not a part of the church officially in any capacity, who have come out against it. Consumer groups have come out against it. And people on the left and people on the right, communists and Republicans and Democrats and all the different flavors have come out against it. And so why is this government going ahead with it? Well, it's a part of their new plan, which has passed, actually this past 2 or 3 weeks ago, has passed through the parliament, of a total revamping of the public sector and the way citizens interact with the government. And they're calling it electronic governance. They're going to change, and supposedly what they're claiming is they're going to do away with bureaucracy and make it very easy through the internet for all the citizens to interact with their government. And this is kind of the hook, or the bait, I should say, in which to hook the citizen into accepting the card, is because it is true that in Greece there is a tremendous amount of bureaucracy. In a socialist state like Greece, where almost everything has to do with the state and passes through the hands of the state, whether it be, of course, the taxes, but also the health, every time you go to the doctor, every time you have any interaction with doctors, but also for all of the businesses. I mean, everything's connected with the state. And, of course, in this time of crisis, economic crisis for Greece, they want to squeeze every last euro out of the citizen. And so they're selling this as both a way to do away with bureaucracy, which, again, is the bait, but for their own purposes, supposedly for the good of the country, they want to catch more people in tax evasion and collect more money from each citizen. So one of the cards that will be eventually put into this super card, the citizen's card, is the buying and selling card, I guess is what you would translate it as. And that's a card that is used at every point of sale and that is transferred immediately from the banks to the government so that the government knows what you're buying and what you're selling so they can tax you. And now this card, which is just now being introduced, will in a very short amount of time, in a year or two, be incorporated into the citizen's card. And that way that they can make sure that they know what's going in and what kind of money you owe to the government. One of the many uses of the card and the goals of the government. It's also going to be applied to the health card. They're going to do away with the existing books that people carry around with them when they go to the doctor. They're going to introduce in the workplace a card which will eventually be used, become a part of this citizen card, which going to work and leaving work you have to punch in so they know that you were there that day and you worked. And so there's a number of uses that they want this card to do and serve their purposes. And so from a technocrat standpoint, I think that they're very excited. But from the church's standpoint and from a lot of other people's standpoint here in Greece, this smells of totalitarianism. And of course, Greece is not alone in the introduction of this kind of thing, this kind of card. We have seen in England an attempt last year to introduce a card just like this, which was rejected actually by the people. And at this point in England, they are not going ahead with it. In Germany, it was accepted. In Russia, it's been accepted, but it's voluntary. In Romania, it's been put on the back burner for 3 years now. But it is in force in a voluntary way at this point in Austria, Belgium, Finland, Lithuania, Sweden, and Italy in the European Union. So this is not a phenomenon just unique to Greece. I think in Greece, they're trying to be really forerunners, pathfinders in terms of technology, and they want to be ahead of everyone and make sure that they can use it for every possible conceivable use. And so that's what's kind of interesting about the Greek development. There, of course, will be in the card a microchip. Actually, there'll be two kinds of electronic microchips. I'm not really a tech whiz, but there'll be two kinds. One that will be manually, you have to take the card and put it in a reader, but also an RFID chip, which is all the rage now in the tech world, which will enable people from a distance to read the card. And this was what's really raising a lot of eyebrows here in Greece. And what people can foresee happening in a year or 2 or 3 time here in Greece is that there'll be stations set around the city of Thessaloniki, for instance. And so if you pass by there, you go into a store, or you go to work, or you go to the doctor, or whatever you do throughout the day, the card will be read. And there'll be a massive computer station set up, which is part of the legislation just passed, down in Athens, I suppose, where the technocrats will be. And it's still unclear whether these technocrats will be public or private institutions. Of course, you can imagine if it's in a private institution and they have all this data, there's just tremendous amount of possibilities for abuse and tyranny for people whose minds are not humble and clean. There's a lot that they can take this information and use it to manipulate the population. But again, the use of this, what might be the development for this card on a daily basis in a practical way? Well, again, you get up and you go to work and you put the card in. You go and eat and use the card to buy your food. You go to the doctor, you use the card to go to the doctor. And you pass through a shopping mall, or you go to the governmental official, you go fill up the gas tank, whatever you can imagine. Conceivably, down the road, the government can place readers from a distance or with the card actually being put into the reader so that they will know where you've been, what you've done, how much you've spent, and all the rest. Kind of reminds people very easily of George Orwell's 1984, Brave New World of Aldous Huxley, but also it brings to mind for Christians the apocalypse, because we know that at the end of the world, and the time before the second coming of Christ, the world is going to be under a totalitarian system of the Antichrist, in which he will have global control and global power, and he will be able to regulate the buying and selling of the whole world. And if you do not have the implant, the chip, as many people think today, but in any case, the seal or the mark of the beast, you will not be able to buy and sell. So this is definitely raising a lot of eyebrows from a lot of people. As I said, there are 14 bishops who have come publicly out against this. A number of them have held gatherings of their clergy and together with their clergy have condemned it and said they will not have anything to do with this card and will not take it because they believe that the card is a means for not only totalitarianism in Greece, but eventually it's a forerunner to the mark of the beast. And the 24 elders and monathos who come out have, of course, spiritual children of Elder Paisios have cited his teaching, which is very well known in Greece, and he has come out and said that before the mark, before the attempt to implant the mark in the hand or the forehead, as it's in the book of the Apocalypse, there will be a card introduced, and that card will be one of the last steps before the mark, and that a Christian should not take the card. He did say that if people do take the card, it's not a denial of Christ, but it is a fall. This is a distinction he made. It's a spiritual fall. And so his witness has, of course, influenced many people in Greece not to be in favor of this card. I just want to name off these bishops because I think it's important for people to know that we're not just talking about lay people or monks or, professors, but we're talking about leaders of the church who are against this and who are calling on the faithful to avoid it and not take it. And so it's really quite an issue here. It, in many ways, raises a lot of issues in terms of not just the book of the Apocalypse or the mark of the beast or whatever, but the whole witness of the church in society today and the place of the church and how the church works and the governance of the church and the voice of the church. It's very interesting to observe how things work here in Greece, I think, to see how the church works and how it should work. These bishops have come out against it. Some bishops who are well known outside of Greece, such as Nicholas of Mesogias, who is written and who studied in America, or Ambrosius of Kalavrita, Anthimos of Thessaloniki, Nectarios of Kerkera, Nicholas of Lamia, Photiodidis, he's the bishop of Lamia, Chrysostomos of Patra, Ignatius of Larissa, Jacob or Iakovos of Argolidos, Cosmas of Etalo-Cananias, that's where St. Cosmas Etalos is from and traveled. Seraphim of Piraeus, who's very outspoken and very well known in Greece for his work against these kind of developments. Andrew or Andreas of Konitsa, Kyrillos of Kifisa, and Seraphim of Kitharon, and Jeremiah of Gortinos are the 14 bishops that I know of, that I've seen and recorded as coming out publicly and speaking against the citizen's card. The Holy Mountain of Athos has issued an announcement, and I'm going to read that to you in a minute. Before I do that, though, I want to read to you what the Holy Synod of Greece has said about this new card and what they're concerned about. This new card, of course, we have not received a clear explanation from the government, and that's one of the problems that has created a lot of confusion. In the Holy Synod in November of last year, when the first meeting of this committee that was formed to look into the whole question, this committee was formed. It's the Synodical Committee on Dogmatic and Canonical Issues, headed up by the Metropolitan of Neapoli and Thasos, Prokopios, and it has within it professors of science, dogmatic professors, and others who are specialists in the questions that are surrounding this whole issue. They issued a statement then. They are expecting and they are asking from the government to issue a text with the technical and legal presuppositions or what the card will contain. And that was issued in November of last year, that they wanted from the government an explanation. Well, nearly 8 months has passed, and there's been no explanation forthcoming. And that in spite of the fact that in the government, in the parliament, the whole bill on e-government has been passed. And that bill is essentially the door for which the card will be the key. In other words, without that bill, the card cannot function. And yet the card was not mentioned in the bill. So people are beginning to become very uneasy that the government is just going to introduce the new card with a executive order, as is done in America and other states today. An executive order with not any reference to the parliament and without any giving any credence to the church or to the people who are against this. And therefore, the bill and the whole system is going to be in place. And then at the end of the year, they're just going to issue an executive order saying that now the card will be mandatory for all the citizens. And so 8 months have passed, and there's been no explanation forthcoming from the government to the church. And the church is very concerned and states that the freedom of the person and the whole question of personal freedom, and of course the question of whether there will be any symbol of the devil, of the evil one, of the Antichrist in the card, these two issues they've officially stated they want to be very on guard about, and they call the faithful to be vigilant. And in their second statement issued a month later, in response to the government issuing a new text on the matter and opening up to public discussion, their comments then, which is the last official text I have from the Holy Synod that I could find anyway. I think they've spoken about it again, but I could not find it, what they've said as of late. I think they're still officially waiting for a decision from the government. But then their comment, Holy Synod's comment, was that this text and this whole approach of the government is vague, self-contradictory, inconsistent, and confused, and that they are greatly reserved, have great reservations about the whole process of the introduction of this new card and this whole system of governance. And that's the Holy Synod. And to my knowledge, to this date, that stance has not changed. In the meantime, since December until today, there's been a number of gatherings. In fact, I think I can count that I'm aware of 3 major gatherings in Thessaloniki and 3 or 4 in Athens, where tens of thousands altogether, if you count them all together, tens of thousands faithful turned out in front of the parliament in protest of this new development. And there were speakers from different quarters, including clergymen. And dioceses, especially over the last 2 months, have held gatherings. Conferences have been held in Thessaloniki and in Athens. People in the legal profession, in the medical profession, and of course the elders and bishops have come out and spoke at these conferences about this whole issue. So it's really garnered a tremendous amount of attention in Greece and especially in the church. And now I'm going to read to you what the Holy Mountain, Holy Community of Mount Athos has to say about the citizens card. Now this is issued in early May, the 5th of May. That's 5.5 months after the first announcement from the Holy Synod. The Holy Community met and issued this statement. They say, I'm going to just get right to the point because they say some introductory comments, but they say that the citizen's card identifies and essentially transforms the citizen into a number of the system of this new e-government. It obscures the person and makes the community more impersonal. That's my own commentary. And they go on to say that the citizens of Greece are now going to be incorporated into an electronic system which then controls and processes the data of their personal life, their economic activity, their health work, their social status, their social behavior and movement, and thus essentially will do away with their personal freedoms such as, they don't state this, but I think they're implying privacy and potentially freedom of movement and freedom of association. They go on to say, because the system, this new e-governance system, has the potential to easily be updated and developed, the card, which has the RFID technology and the chip and can be updated and developed, because of this potential for development, there is a clear danger to Christians that their religious freedom of conscience can be violated, thus depriving them of the possibility to freely confess their faith. Now, I think what the Holy Fathers mean here is that the violation of their freedom of conscience can happen without their approval because they don't know what's in the card. They won't have access to the information. Only those technocrats of the government will be able to open and manipulate the information in the card. And so therefore things can be placed in there which are anti-Christian, symbols or other things, as you'll see now they mention in the text. They go on to say, because furthermore, the authority of administration of this electronic governance system is given to entities whose public or private nature is still unclear, and moreover, that this bill, this electronic governance, gives them, these technocrats, the facility to add or remove the card's data. There exists the possibility that the faithful will, through the card and without their knowledge, be employing anti-Christian symbols. And of course, I think what they have in mind is the symbol of the man of iniquity, the 666. But also there are many anti-Christian symbols today in use in Europe and in America. Many Christians aren't aware of them because they don't understand the meanings, but there are indeed many satanic symbols being used in society today. They may be referring to those as well. They continue, for all of these reasons, everything we've said in this text, the Holy Community of Mount Athos expresses its great uneasiness and fervently calls upon the Hellenic government not to commence with the issuing of the electronic citizen's card. Furthermore, it recommends that all Orthodox Christians continue using the conventional means of identification. We are opposed, in conclusion they state, we are opposed to the imposition of such a card as compulsory. And as a footnote, as a kind of an end note, let's say, they state that Orthodox Christians do not forget that greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. That's from John's first epistle, 4:4. And he has overcome the world. However, this does not therefore imply our agreement with compulsory activities deprived of freedom. So they want to point out here, I think, an objection that's raised by many that, well, we're not afraid, it doesn't matter, we're not afraid of the Antichrist. And of course, that's not the issue, but in any case, people often say that, even some bishops have said that, well, this is really not an issue because we're not afraid of anything and we're not afraid of the Antichrist, and Christ has overcome the world and all the rest. But as they say, this does not mean, therefore, that we are just indifferent and go along and agree with such unfree, compulsory activities on the part of the government. There are two main thrusts on the part of the people and the faithful in Greece against this. And of course, the one is something that's common with people all around the world and in America, and that is the whole question of the rights, the freedoms in a free society. And that this is an encroachment on the freedom of movement and freedom of privacy, all the different freedoms that people should have in a free society. But then there's a deeper issue for an Orthodox Christian, and that is the whole question of the deception of the evil one and the increase of evil in the world, and therefore the eventual appearance of the man of iniquity, and how this all plays into that. In the next program, I'm going to read to you a speech given at one of these conferences by an elder of Mount Athos, an abbot of Mount Athos, who was asked to speak at a conference of several thousand people here in Thessaloniki. And I think it would be very instructive for all of us, because he gets into both details of the whole issue, which will better explain what is this citizen's card all about, but also and more importantly, he gives us guidance from the Holy Scriptures and from the Fathers as to how we should understand and what our stance as Christians should be in front of these dangers and these developments. So in the next program, I hope you'll join us, hearing a word from the Holy Mountain on this very interesting and important and issue that is not, of course, affecting just Greece, is coming to America. We'll talk about that also in the next program, that in America there's also a attempt to introduce a national identification card and using biometrics and all the rest. And what does that mean for us as Orthodox Christians? Does it matter? Should we just go on and live our life, or does this really affect us? Here in Greece, they seem to think it does. A lot of people do, including the Holy Synod and the Holy Mountain of Athos. So let's listen and hear what this word from the Holy Mountain and from the Church of Greece is for all of us, all of our Orthodox Christians around the world. Welcome back to another postcard from Greece. Well, in this program, we're going to continue our look at the new developments in Greece, a whole question, as we did in our previous program, of the citizen's card and what it means, what our stance as Orthodox Christians should be. And of course, that means we're going to look at the spiritual and theological aspects of the whole question, and not just the questions of freedom of movement and freedom of association and all the rest, which we discussed in the previous program, which are important. And as Orthodox Christians, I think we should all be very concerned about that. We should all not be indifferent to the questions of freedom in society. That would be really, I think, sinful. But there's a deeper issue for us as Orthodox Christians, which is not an issue for most others who do not share the faith of the apostles and of the fathers, and who are not standing continually with an eschatological stance looking to the end, to the consummation, as Orthodox Christians should. We should be standing continually looking toward the Lord at the right hand of the Father and ever expecting His second coming. In this program, we're going to share with you the thoughts, the comments, not the entire speech, of course, but many of the main points of a particular speech given by an elder of Mount Athos. This is the abbot of Xiropotamou Monastery in Mount Athos, Elder Joseph, who was invited here to Thessaloniki not too long ago, about a month ago, to give a talk at a conference called for the purpose of examining the whole question of the citizen's card and this whole development in Greece. And I think it's very instructive, and I hope that it will help many of us to better understand why this issue should concern us as Orthodox Christians and why so many people in Greece are concerned about it. It's not something that's at all just a issue of a few, but bishops and clergy and the Holy Synod and the Holy Communion of Mount Athos are all very concerned about these developments in Greek society. Of course, it's not just here in Greece, it's around the world and also in America, and we'll talk about that perhaps at the end of this program or in the next. Well, let's begin and let's hear a little bit about what the elder had to say here at this gathering. He first talks about in the late 1990s, there was an attempt back in the 90s of this sort on a much more simple basis, which raised a great amount of resistance from the church. At that time, the numbering of the people, let's say turning people into numbers, the impersonal whole approach of the government was resisted. And there were many attempts in the 90s without them ever being employed. So the resistance of the church, he says, did bring about a change in the governmental policy, and therefore we should take hope that the more we work against it, the more we work for the principles of the person and the freedom of the person, there will be good fruits. And he reminds us of the movement under Archbishop Christodoulos, about 10 years ago, where there were millions of signatures gathered. And that these signatures were not gathered for anything else but as an expression of our confession of faith as Orthodox Christians in the name of Christ, and as an expression of our religious freedom of conscience. A freedom of conscience. And this question of the citizen's card has to do again with this confession of our faith and with our religious freedom of conscience. And he reminds us that it's the Christians that are always against the encroachment of the freedom of conscience, and also who rise up against movements which would muffle the freedom of the Christians to confess Christ or blaspheme the name of Christ. It's the Christians who've always led the way. To learn what our stance should be vis-a-vis the world, and especially the mystery of iniquity, which has been working since the days of the apostles, and even before, really, from the beginning of the world, we must take refuge in the Holy Scriptures and the book of Revelation in particular. And the book of Revelation should not be seen as taboo or off limits. Even if there are people who misrepresent or misunderstand the book of Revelation, it does not mean, therefore, we should avoid it, because there are many people who misunderstand the Scriptures. Therefore, should we avoid the Scriptures and try to understand the words of the Lord in the Gospels? Of course not. The fathers and trustworthy interpreters tell us that the book of Revelation has much to give us and help us in terms of how to live now, this time between the first and second comings of Christ. And it's not just about the end. It's not just about the very last days. But it helps us understand our stance as Orthodox Christians in this world. The Church awaits with desire and love the second coming of Christ, the Savior. We say, "Come quickly, O Lord." Even so, come quickly with St. John. It's this eschatological stance, this expectation and longing, this sense of pilgrimage and the brevity of this life, this whole stance of awaiting the second coming of Christ, this must be our stance. This must be our longing and our sense as well. And now my comments here, I think this is really key. If we do not have this, if we are not standing with longing and expectation, we will not understand what we should do in these days, and we will not live a true Christian life. And the next step is very close to secularization and loss of the grace of God. So it is absolutely key that we stand in this way and not turn our gaze away toward the world, but have it always toward the east, let's say, toward the second coming of our Lord. Now, in the book of Revelation, first, before the coming of the man of iniquity, there will be the coming of the false prophet. And the interpreters of the sacred book tell us that the false prophet is not just a person, but it's also circumstances. It's both, rather, that there will be circumstances of deception and mechanisms of deception, but also a person that will personify and preach like St. John did for our Lord. He will preach for the coming of the Antichrist. Now, in the book of Revelation, there is the famous passage about the mark of the beast. And in Greek, the key words here that I'm going to read you are kepi pandes. And in English, that translation is, he causeth all, or he makes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. And the elder here says, now, we need to note that this shows deliberation, maneuvering, deception, and pressure, this causing all, making all accept the mark. This is in Greek, methodivsi, a manipulation, a maneuvering on the part of the evil one to bring people into subjugation, to bring humanity to the dead end, to no way out, this one-way road. And many people have brought this up, that this whole process of electronic governance really does appear to be a kind of a one-way street and a dead end, and there is no going back. And it's one of the things that people bring up about this whole situation here in Greece. Today in Greece, with the announcement regarding the citizen card, everything positive is stressed, of course, about the card. They're selling it to us. We don't know exactly what it is and how it will work technologically. We just hear all the good things, that it'll stop the bureaucracy and all the rest. And, of course, they did open it up to a public discussion. This public discussion was had mainly through the internet, and tens of thousands of people were said to have spoken up and in public debate, said their word about this whole endeavor. No one knows the outcome of this. No statistics were ever reported, and this remains a mystery. What was the response of the Greek people? And the law that finally passed through Parliament just a few days ago, speaks only of electronic governance, changes in how the people will interact with the government, databases and all the rest of it. There's no mention of the card. There's no mention of the card at all. And we are expecting, the elder says, an executive order to be issued, no voting, and just one day we're going to wake up with the citizen's card as a done deal, even in the face of tremendous opposition. It looks as if we'll never learn how or what the card is exactly from the government. Now, there's a lot of people who've reported on what it is and the technology of it, but from the government, it looks like we're never going to hear anything officially stated. Now, he pauses here and he says, let's hear a word about what is electronic government. What is this e-government? This is something that's being pushed internationally, as we've mentioned in the previous program. There are a lot of states and a lot of countries in Europe that have pushed this and that have introduced this. And he notes something that's, I think, really interesting if we step back and look at history. He notes that all governance until today is based on the written word. Littera scripta manet. And that is the written word, the written letter abides. It's from the famous Latin expression, vox audita perit, littera scripta manet. The spoken word perishes, the written word endures. Now that has been the basis of governance and society for thousands of years. Scripta manet. But now, everything's in flux. With the electronic word, can be erased, can be manipulated, and the public can be manipulated through that. The law creates, the elder says, new independent centers of administration, public or private. We're not sure. It's not clear in the law. And these are going to be run by technocrats, people with tremendous power. And if they're not people with honor, can easily manipulate the system. There's no security. And indeed, anyone who wants to, this is my comment now, and anyone who wants to go online can search and find a lot of articles about how databases and computers are broken into, and there's no security in this area of our life. Many, many cases around the world today of people stealing databases, selling them, and all this information being leaked. So there's really no privacy whatsoever. Now, this new technology, the law says, well, is what they've told us, rather. The law doesn't say that. We'll use RFID technology. This whole RFID technology, which is new to Greece, is old in places like the United States. It's been used in banks around the world, in commercial transactions. But it's important to note here that the potential for social control, social manipulation, is tremendous. Potential to be used for keeping people out, for instance, out of stores or out of businesses or out of government offices, is tremendous. I'll give you an example. This is not what they said in the speech, but if in your database they have information on you of past falls or errors or whatever, that'll be with you all your life. And therefore they can basically make it very hard for anyone to change and repent and improve their life. They will be with them. And also, if people are not honorable, they can introduce things into the card which are actually untrue or manipulations of the truth and make it very hard. And so people could be actually kept out of society much more easy with this card, or they could be forcefully kept in society. In other words, that you have to have this card if you want to be a part of society. And so without this chip, without this card, you will have no access. So you are forced in, let's say, to the system. You have no choice. If you want to be a part of the society, a part of the system, you have to have the card. And so you can see immediately that things are becoming very totalitarian. Now, continuing with the elder's talk, he says that the card will be used for public and private payments or paychecks. That what we know about the use of the card and what they're planning, this connects with the statements issued by the Prime Minister of Greece and to the whole wider development in terms of global governance. And I've talked about this about a year ago on another podcast, how the Prime Minister has come out on several occasions and called for global government. He says, there is no way out of our economic mess without global government, and quickly. So he's calling on the people of Greece and the people of Europe to speed up the process in which global government will happen. And of course, this whole development of electronic governance and the citizen card is a part of that plan. This reminds us what is written in the book of Revelation. And there we read that all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, the man of iniquity, those whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And again it says later on, he causes the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark. And so we can see this totalitarianism, this complete worldwide movement, and all of Greek society, this totalitarianism, and I don't know a better word, is clearly present today in the developments we see here, but also in the book of Revelation. So it appears like they're making ready, but the elder says we cannot be for sure. No one can know for sure, because the Lord has said very clearly, no one knows the day or the hour. But he does warn us, and this is what we have to keep in mind and stay on alert. Don't be deceived. Watch. Observe the sign of the times. Scripture clearly talks about the signs, and in fact the Lord criticizes severely the Jews because they cannot discern the signs of the times. And he also points to us with the parable of the fig tree, that when this branch is yet tender and putting forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So likewise, when you see these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. So the Lord, with this parable and with these references, clearly telling us, be vigilant. Doesn't mean that we're all going to become biblical scholars or interpreters of text, but it does mean that we're going to have to be vigilant spiritually and have in mind the prophecy of St. John and the words of the Lord, which were given for our benefit, every Christian's benefit of every age. So we see that there are many, many people, many of the world's leaders, speaking of a need for world government. This looks like a one-way road, a dead end. Of course, the elder says, we always have the possibility to confess and to give a good witness. But we must, and this is our job here and what the elder was trying to do, explain and show what the proper phronima, the mindset, the stance of the Orthodox Christian should be. And this is what we're most interested in. What should be our stance? We mustn't fear. We must not bring fear in our hearts, because that's a sign of faithlessness and lack of trust in God. But we must be vigilant and learn how to then live in this day and age. For us, Orthodox Christians, this is the first thing, first of all. And now, therefore, it's an issue not of civil freedom, but an issue of religious freedom of conscience and the confession of our faith. It's only secondly an issue of civil rights and an issue of government intrusion and all the rest. For us, it's first of all an issue of religious freedom and confession of faith. Now, one of the questions that's raised is that since this is not the final seal of Antichrist, why are we making it an issue and even scaring people? This is what the elder asks, and the rhetorical question is going to answer it for us. And he says, we have been and will be more so with every passing day in the end times. And that is why we must have the phronima of the Christians of the last times, those who will live the last 7 years of the reign of Antichrist. We must have their phronima, even if we don't end up living in their times. This is the phronima that we talked about in the beginning, of standing in expectation and not becoming one with this world and our gaze toward the things of this world and the whole way of life of the worldly. From this point on, from today, we must have this mindset, he says. This is the same that they had in the early church, actually, the kind of expectation for martyrdom, departing to the Lord and meeting the Lord. Another question that is raised is, if it is inevitable and prophesied, what's the point in even dealing with it? Whatever we do, it will happen. And the question is referring to the whole mark of the beast and all the other events. Yes, that's true, but the time is not predetermined. This is one of the most interesting aspects of the talk, and I think really we need to pay attention here. It's very interesting. It says the time is not predetermined. While the first coming was clear, and the prophets said with almost 100% accuracy in Daniel and other places about the first coming of Christ, the second coming no one knows. And it is a time which depends upon the struggle waged by Christians and the conditions of the world. In other words, the degree of our faithfulness or apostasy, the faithfulness or apostasy of the world, that will determine the second coming. And so it does have to do with our witness and our struggle. If people hear and see that Orthodox Christians are struggling and faithful and vigilant vis-a-vis the whole question of the end and the signs and these events, this is a great witness and a great kerygma, a great proclamation of the faith. And so this is an opportunity for us to give a witness to our faith and our trust and our expectation of the second coming, and can bring many people to Christ. And we should show our eagerness and our readiness and our faith in the Lord's second coming. It's a sign of a true Christian. Now, the elder points us in his speech, and continuing with his speech, he points us to St. John's first epistle, 4:2-4, and in there it says, it gives us some criteria about how to understand the world and the spirits of this world. And it says, "Hereby know ye the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is of God." So if they confess Jesus Christ is come in the flesh, that spirit, that person is of God. However, every spirit that confesses not that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of Antichrist, whereof you have heard that it should come, and even now is in the world. That's St. John's first epistle 4:2-4. So, the elder says here the main characteristic, the main identification, the way people will know us as Orthodox Christians in this world is our confession of the name of Christ. Not just God, not just a God, but the Holy Trinity, the Lord Himself, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Trinity. This is the main message to the world. This is our main message, our main proclamation to the world, that Christ has come in the flesh. This is what we must be about, and this has a connection. Now, the elder is going to connect this and reminds us that in Luke, the Lord says also Himself, that whoever confesses me, I will confess before the Father, and whoever denies me will be denied before the Father, will not have me as support. Now, what's the connection between all this we've talked about, confession of faith, the card, and religious freedom? These three things, because oftentimes it's not very clear. Well, the card, here, something, a really important detail about the card, which I think is what leads people to be suspicious. Now, the card can add, the technocrats can add information and functions into the card later on. In other words, what you have in the beginning is not at all what will be or can be later on. The data, the messages, the information that can be added. The holder cannot read the card. Only the technocrat can read and change the card. So there's a great possibility of adding, as we said previously, anti-Christian symbols. And such symbols are very ubiquitous in our society today. Also, that this is leading very easily to a cashless society. We said that with this card, people will buy and sell. Well, it's very easy. The next step for this card to be electronically to take and put money into the bank and not have cash at all. So that kind of cashless society goes well with what we know of in terms of the end times and the society under the Antichrist, that everything will be controlled through the banks and through the central government, that anyone who wants to buy and sell must have a card. If the cash is no longer available in society, well then you have to have the card to buy and sell. We're reminded of the words of the Lord and of St. John in the Revelation, book of Revelation. Now, also, one thing that stands out is that there's one card for all uses. So, again, brings us back to the question of Revelation, and then one can see why this becomes an issue of confession of faith and religious freedom. Later on, whoever is not an obedient citizen is simply erased from the system. So we can see that the system, this kind of system that they're trying to introduce, can very easily lead to the totalitarianism that's spoken of in the Scriptures and in the book of Revelation. So there's a very, very great possibility of and ease of persecution of the Christians. Well, one question arises. Why does all this really bother us? This electronic governance really bothers us. Now, the elders kind of answered this, but he wants to answer it again in another way and remind us of the great experience of the church. He says that the church has long memory and a great experience. Christ said to his disciples, we read in the Gospel of Luke, spoke about persecution, spoke about Jerusalem, the destruction, he spoke about the end times. And this instruction of the Lord is not just for then, but it's for every generation and every age. It's a continuous, diachronic instruction and direction of the church. It means, in other words, it teaches us how we should walk in this world and what should we expect and how we will advance even in the midst of persecutions. We can see how, as Christians, we must live in the midst of persecution. It was always so. And so our experience, this experience from the persecutions of the ancient church, also tells us the following, that in the ancient church there was an attempt to create confusion or to create a murkiness in order to bring the Christians to deny Christ. We read about that in the Synaxardy and in the lives of the martyrs, how they tried to manipulate them into offering incense to the idols. The emperors wanted the people to worship them or their favorite god, not because they believed that they themselves were gods, but it was an issue of obedience, showing lawfulness, that you are lawful, in other words, obedient to the emperor. That's what that was about. So subjection to the ruler of this world, because behind the emperor, when he becomes a tool of Antichrist or of the devil, well, you're subjecting yourself to the ruler of this world. And that's what the Antichrist really is a stand-in for the ruler of this world. Since no one, they would say to the ancient, in the ancient church to the martyrs, well, since no one really believes that the emperor is a god, why don't you just offer? So that was a sense of creating confusion and murkiness so they might be confused and offer, thinking it's not a denial of Christ. Or there was the whole question of those giving money, that their names be written in the books, not offering actually, but paying someone off to write their name in the book so they didn't have to face the whole question of martyrdom or offering. And these were called and considered lapse in the ancient church, and the church rejected their actions as a denial of Christ. Now, this experience of the church, we need to remind ourselves and bring this to bear on our life today. There's another example. The elder brings up another example of St. Theodore of Tiro and the whole miracle of the Koliva. You remember from the Synaxarion that Julian the Apostate wanted to take blood from sacrifices and put it in the marketplace and in the food so the Christians would end up eating from this food with the blood of the sacrifices. And the Lord sent St. Theodore to the bishop of the city to save the Christians from this deception and this scandal and this defilement. Even though St. Paul does say that it's not in itself a defilement, but it can be a scandal to the Christians. And so he would rather not eat of this food forever into the ages rather than scandalize his fellow Christians. So the Lord sent St. Theodore to the bishop in a dream to save the Christians from even this scandal and this confusion of the conscience of the Christians. You see here how one should really be very cognizant of these dangers and in trampling down upon the conscience of the Christian and how important that is. And these are guides for us today, how we might approach and why this thing, on one hand, the whole card, the citizen card and these developments might seem very, well, why even bother? It's really excessive, it's really extreme and fanatical. But you see that in these instances in the ancient church and in St. Theodore of Tiro and others, that in fact, also after the legalization of the church, the devil wanted to bring the church into union with heretics. It's another way to also confuse and pervert and scandalize and defile, let's say, the church, this union with heretics, with the Monophysites. There are many attempts that the saints of the day, St. Maximus and others, resisted and did not give in. So another example, throughout the church we have many examples like that with the Uniates and with other groups throughout the history of the church where this was seen as a matter of confession of faith and not simply an unimportant issue. So in every age, and here's our conclusion really, coming to our conclusion now of the elders' talk, in every age the ultimate aim of the evil one by way of deception is to bring the Christian to deny the name of Christ. To deny the name of Christ. This is the ultimate aim. And so our response must be that we remain vigilant and we see this as not a simple issue of civil rights, but as a confession of faith, and we call upon the personal religious freedom of conscience of every Christian in our refusal to take the citizen card. And that ends a very, brief and compact retelling of the talk of Elder Joseph of Chiropotamo given here in Thessaloniki. I cannot do it justice, and of course I might have misspoken, so please do not hold every word as spoken by the Elder of Chiropotamo. But I think I have communicated to you the essence of the message, a message that the Elder brings us from the Holy Mountain of Athos, and tries to help us see the whole question as a matter of a spiritual question, a matter of confession of faith, and a matter of our salvation, and not simply a worldly matter of civil rights and encroachment of tyranny of a state. And so in our next program, we'll discuss how some of these developments are happening outside of Greece, in America, and what our stance should be and how we should remain vigilant in the face of these new developments around the world and what they mean for us. Until next time, good struggles and good vigilance.